Welcome to the Midnight Vigil, the channel where the stars are always right and there really is a monster hiding underneath your bed. This is my review of the 2018 video game Vampyr. As usual, this is an audio-only episode, so feel free to minimize and go about your business. I will discuss the history of the project, give my impressions, and finally conclude with its legacy. Vampyr tells the story of Dr. Jonathan Reid, a World War I surgeon who returns to London and is subsequently made a vampire. The course of the game charts Reid's transformation into a creature of the night and features unique gameplay elements centered around how torn his life is. He is bound as a doctor by the Hippocratic Oath, which means he must preserve life, but this is paradoxical to his nature as a vampire, who must feed on human blood to sustain himself. Jonathan searches for the identity of his maker while trying to stop a deadly epidemic from consuming the population of London. Vampyr is an action role-playing horror game developed by Dontnod Entertainment, who most of you will remember from the excellent Life is Strange, and some of you will know them from Remember Me. I have enjoyed both of their games, and had been looking forward to this one for a long time. Vampyr was announced way back in 2015, with most of the Life is Strange dev team working on the project. E3 2016 saw the release of new footage, a new trailer, and the anticipated release date was late 2017. Vampyr would miss that release date due to an unnamed technical error, and it would end up releasing at the beginning of June of this year. So we're in the impressions portion of the video, and of course I want to start off by saying that I loved this game and I recommend it. It has some issues which I'm going to discuss first before I go in depth about what I enjoyed, but I am ultimately very satisfied with this game and I would include it as one of the better titles I've played in recent years. So the negatives. A couple of odd things stood out to me. The subtitles and the actual words spoken in the game are not the same. There are numerous errors with the subtitles, and there are also errors in the in-game text. Words are either misspelled or grammar is improperly applied. Facial animations on one character in particular drove me nuts. Lady Ashbury, the red-headed vampire Jonathan meets early in the game, has almost no motion in her facial expressions. It's like she has overdosed on Botox. Maybe this was done on purpose because she's a vampire, I thought, but when you end up meeting other vampire characters, they display at least a little bit better facial animations. So that's definitely not the case. This isn't Mass Effect Andromeda levels of bad, but it really stood out and really annoyed me. Other problems with animations in general. When you speak to characters, most of them, if they are standing up, will sway drunkenly. You actually meet an actual drunk character in a bar in the first few minutes of the game, and he sways and wobbles really realistically. I thought this was really well done, but I was dismayed to discover it's like the default animation for most characters in motion, so get used to seeing people just move around as you're talking to them, like they've had too many shots of Jameson. I mean, considering how depressing this game is, you can't really blame the people for being drunk, I guess. The keyboard controls are horrible and are not intuitive at all. I struggled with them initially, and I ended up switching to an Xbox One controller because there's a really serious glitch or bug trying to use mouse and keyboard. The game tells you that to switch between attackers, you need to wiggle the mouse from left to right, and I could never get this function to work. And switching between enemies when in combat is obviously important in a game like this, so this is a major disappointment. And I'm almost tempted to say that if you are stubborn and you insist on playing with a keyboard and a mouse, this is verging on game breaking. In fact, it is game breaking. If you can't switch between enemies that you're attacking in combat, combat is utterly useless. The opening segment of the game is horrific, and really advertises the game poorly. If this were a TV show, you'd turn it on and you'd think you missed the pilot episode or something. The game opens, and the main character, Jonathan Reid, doesn't know who he is or what's going on. He doesn't have amnesia or something cliche like that. It's just never explained why, in like the first hour of the game, he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know what his name is. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know anything about London. He doesn't know. I mean, he's from London. The character is from London. He's returning from the war, but he doesn't know any of the local area. He doesn't know, like prominent figures or culture. He doesn't know like locations. I mean, some of this is done for like the actual player, because you have to explain a lot of this in-game information to the person that's actually playing the game. But why the hell do I not know my name? Why do I not know what's going on? I don't understand. It's really, really confusing. Just from following the game and watching the concept and story trailers, I felt like I knew the main character better than he did in the beginning. I honestly wouldn't blame you if you turned this game off in the first hour because you were convinced you were playing some amateur hour hack job game or something like that. I don't know if content was cut from the intro of the game, but it certainly feels like there's some major character development is missing. The beginning cutscene is like, it's very short. I was kind of surprised that we don't have more development going on. The game really just opens, and it opens, you wake up, you do these things, and then before you know it, within 3 minutes of starting the game, you're being shot at and you're being chased, and it doesn't work at all. For a narrative game like this, where the narrative is the absolute best part of the game, the beginning is just a huge disappointment. The ending is equally clumsy, but for different reasons. Of course, no spoilers, but the ending of the game is like an hour of exposition dump. In fact, I would put that as like an hour and a half. You awkwardly end up talking to a bunch of characters using the conversation trees, and it just feels so rushed. Like Dontnod realized that they still hadn't concluded the game or communicated the vital story element to the players, so they just have characters relay stuff that probably could have been done in a better way in-game. You don't get answers to what's going on until literally the final hour of the game, and I honestly wouldn't have minded if the game had another chapter or so to actually show me this information instead of telling me this information in such a clumsy manner. Talking about the ending, again, no spoilers. The boss fight is going to drive most of you crazy, I think. The difficulty of the game spikes way, way, way high in the final fight. There's 2 phases, one of which is stupidly easy, and then it transitions into the second phase, and it's something that I would consider a standard boss fight encounter in Dark Souls. I finished the game stupidly powerful, very high level, overpowered, overleveled, and the boss outleveled me by over 10 levels. The boss had crazy damage resistance, did crazy damage, and could summon mobs of adds that you had to deal with, as well as dealing with the main central boss. I ended up getting it on my 3rd try, but those first 2 attempts were extremely frustrating. Consider yourself warned. This may be a weak criticism, but some of the character development here feels really off. You can do some really horrific things in this game, which affect literally all of London, and just about none of the main characters will call you out on your actions. Only the minor characters really react to what you do. They will either totally call you out and confront you, or they will mention in very vague terms how something terrible has happened and, oh, isn't it so bad? And then they'll go back to their lives like nothing's really happened. That's pretty much the 2 extremes here. The times that the main characters do interact with you for the stuff that you've done, it just feels kind of like almost an obligation, like I'm obligated to mention that this thing happened, but instead of going into depth about how you, murdered an orphanage, just as a made-up example, instead of talking about all of the blood on your hands, let's talk about something that's totally trivial. It's just kind of annoying. There's a bit of character development with one of the female main characters, Lady Ashbury, that feels super rushed, and the game clearly is trying to force some sort of relationship with her. It's going to be up to you whether you think this is handled organically or not, but I'm kind of surprised here that this ended up happening the way that it did. I ran into some frame rate issues, some performance issues, which was puzzling considering I have a very modern system. I have a GTX 1070 and a Ryzen 5 1600X processor, but I struggle to maintain 60 frames per second in some areas. Your mileage will vary here though. Finally, my last criticism, and it's a big one, is that this game lacks a lot of things I think many players are going to expect from a role-playing game. I jumped into the game and took a look at the skill tree of abilities and thought, okay, this is just the first page, and there will be more as the game unlocks. Nope, that's really all there is. You have 3 offensive powers, not including your ultimate abilities, and there's only 3 of those. So there's 3. There's 3 offensive powers in total, and you only get to choose one ultimate ability, so at any one time you have 4 abilities that you can work with. What skills this game has are interesting, sure, but other RPGs are going to give you more toys to play around with. There's also only one alternate outfit for Jonathan, which is cosmetic only and has no in-game bonuses, which is disappointing, and it's the pre-order one, and I just checked this now, and you can buy it as DLC if you want. I found this outfit to be very ugly, and I equipped it once and then took it off immediately. But the DLC weapons are really cool, and I used them the whole game. You can't customize his appearance at all, so as a beard enthusiast, I was excited to see if I could get Jonathan a pretty awesome full beard, but no, he just has his default, very neat, very clean, very military beard. It looks good, sure, but some other customization options for appearance would be welcome, and I think that it's something that's kind of integral to the role-playing aspect of a role-playing game. There's also not really a whole lot of depth to the skills, though they feel fun and they're fun to play with and use, but your mileage is going to vary. I found about 2 powers that I liked, and I used them the whole game, and I chose the most powerful ultimate ability that did the most damage, and I kept that the whole game, and I upgraded those 3 really early on, and, that was pretty much it. So the positives. The first thing I want to discuss before we talk mechanics or gameplay are the themes that this game conveys, and let me just say how surprised I was about the things that this game talks about, because I was not really expecting this kind of depth. Sexism, racism, distrust of immigrants, classism, just to name a few. I mean, there's a lot of isms in this game, and they're all handled in a mature, intelligent way in the story. There's a female nurse who can't progress her career because she's a woman, and she's limited to only being a nurse. Characters discuss how foreigners are negatively impacting the country and are taking jobs away in factories and on the docks. Vampires discuss how they want to preserve English traditions and customs. NPCs look down on Jonathan Reid for his fancy clothes and education, because apparently he can't understand their issues due to his background and upbringing. Lots of discussions about the war and about the tragedies of war and how soldiers are coming home changed and shell-shocked. The death penalty gets discussed, along with things like police corruption and brutality. There's even a philanthropist tycoon who plans on building a wall in London to isolate the infected from the non-infected. So yeah, make of that what you will, because, I feel like maybe this is a mention to a very real person in our real world who wants to build a wall as well, Who knows? Let's see. Before people get bent out of shape about the politics, again, all of the things are handled in such an organic and mature way. I never felt annoyed or bothered by what was happening. I didn't feel like the developers were trying to impress their own political agenda on the players. All of this adds to the level of realism and identity that this game has for earliest 20th century English culture. This really is what England would be like in that age. I felt like it was authentic. I don't think it's going to rub people the wrong way here. This is a very atmospheric game, something Dontnod paid special attention to in development. Vampyr is a brooding, depressing, and violent game, which I loved. I roleplayed as a totally evil character, which I always do when I'm given the option. And my Jonathan Reid became the terror of London. Mothers would clutch their children and cowered behind their doors when I would walk by. Civilians would look down when I approached them. Enemies felt my wrath, and the city was forever changed by the actions I took. The few people who stood up to me were cast aside, as I easily became the most powerful creature in England. The voice acting is excellent, and the English characters feel and sound authentic. The educated characters sound cultured and had that posh English accent. And the poor, miserable wretches that I fed upon all had the worker-class English accents as well. The Irish and Scottish characters all sounded great too, and their pronunciation is authentic, and it isn't someone doing a bad impersonation. This feels like a very English game. The writing is fantastic, and I felt for Jonathan when he expressed guilt initially for the things he did, and I felt for him when he was torn by his human and inhuman urges. The NPCs all have interesting stories, and there are no secondary wasted characters here. Everyone adds to the narrative, and all of the side missions feel vital to understanding the people whose broken, pathetic lives you're utterly ruining. There are no pointless fetch quests, so I encourage you to do as many of them as you can. It really enhanced my immersion. The environments look pretty good. The lighting is great, the fog effects are great, but you will really notice the occasionally dated textures in the environments. So this is a bit of a mixed bag, I think. The NPCs look nice too, but they are animated kind of poorly, as I discussed above. The citizen mechanics were interesting and very unique, and it helped flesh out how impactful the decisions Jonathan made were on London as a whole. I had a very, very negative impact on London since I killed and fed on everyone. Literally every person that I could kill in this game, I went out of my way to make sure I could kill. Of course, feeding on people means you can level up more since it gives you a ton of XP. So if you want to become more powerful, you're going to have to kill people. If you want to be a good guy, if you want to be that person, sure, this game lets you do that. But just know that the game is going to be way more difficult as a result, and you will be significantly weaker. Combat is fine. I think this is a little exaggerated in the reviews I've read. It's not going to blow you away with its depth, but it's not the buggy, broken mess some reviewers are making it out to be. Combat is difficult in the beginning of the game, but as I grew in power, it became very easy and wasn't a problem except in the initial stages of the game. The lore here fascinated me. If you enjoy English mythology, specifically Celtic mythology, there's a lot to like here. The world feels real and lived in. Vampyr explores the vampire of its creatures in a way I haven't seen in a game, not since Vampyr the Masquerade all those years ago. This is easily the definitive vampire game for our generation, in my opinion. The nature of vampirism is discussed, with some characters admiring them or others viewing them as parasites, and the vampire politics are presented in a way that isn't groundbreaking, especially if you're familiar with the Masquerade, but it is enjoyable nonetheless. The key takeaway here is that vampires are a thing to be feared, which is a nice return to form. They're not romantic figures to fall in love with and bang. They're heartless monsters who feed upon humans and kill without remorse. Gameplay in general is enjoyable, but it isn't deep at all. The main draw here is the story and how Jonathan's journey is handled. Again, no spoilers, but I really liked my ending, and I felt like my Jonathan deserved what happened to him. I'm very happy with the narrative, and would like to explore this game and its lore again. I was deeply disturbed at the things you can do in this game, And of course, I won't give anything major away because the fun is in the discovery, but this is a seriously dark game. London is drenched in despair and darkness, and not a single ray of light or hope could escape my path of destruction. Just two brief encounters that really stood out to me. There's one character who is mentally disturbed and believes that her body is decaying and that she's a vampire. And you eventually work with her, as a doctor, and you confront her and you tell her that there are other real monsters hiding in the dark, like yourself. And this NPC says something like, doctor, I think that's the first real thing you've said to me since I've met you. And she's so utterly disturbed by how cold and alien you are. Another encounter has you confronting a remorseless killer, and when you tell him, why are you so calm about being found out and revealed as this horrible monster? The NPC reacts and says, you're acting just as calm as I am, Doctor. We have that in common, don't we? And he can see what you are too, and he knows that you're a monster too. And you both sort of look at each other, and you recognize each other for being these horribly cruel monsters who destroy lives for the thrill of it. This person is human and you're a vampire, but you share this bond in common, and this NPC points it out, and it really disturbs the main character. Like he's reflecting in his internal monologue about how almost grossed out he is when he realizes that he has things in common with this person, and he can't just sort of look down on them for being this remorseless, cold-blooded killer because, hey, like I said, we just ate an orphanage full of children, so, maybe I shouldn't judge you. What's interesting is these are huge character developing moments with side characters. Side characters that in other RPGs you would probably ignore or not talk to, and the real horror of the game is expressed here. There's no jump scares or other horror game elements. The real horror is finding out the depths of human nature and the things we'll do to each other when we think no one is watching. Replayability is big here. There are multiple ways to make Jonathan your own, and there are at least 2 endings that will reflect the consequences of your actions. I got 24 hours out of my first playthrough. The game never dragged, I was never bored, and I honestly felt like the game could have gone on much longer, and I would have been happy with that. I did about 90% of the side quests, and I only got canceled out of a few for killing off characters early, so if you're a completionist like me, your first playthrough will probably be similarly long like mine was. This game definitely has value. I got it on a discount for $37 before launch, which is a fantastic deal, but I wouldn't have any problem recommending this for full price. You're going to get your money's worth here, especially so if you play it again multiple times to see how differently things could have gone. So finally, the legacy portion of this review. Vampyr on Metacritic has a 72 for the PC version, indicating mixed reviews, and on Steam has mostly positive reviews, with 70% of users recommending the game. Vampyr is being received fine so far, but it's a step down from the lofty heights of Life is Strange. Steam Spy estimates, which are very, very rough, and I really didn't want to include them in this review, but whatever, we're just gonna see what they have to say. Steam Spy estimates about 100,000 copies have been sold so far on Steam, which is healthy and not really surprising if those numbers are even close to being true. Dontnod have said previously that Vampyr needs to sell 500,000 units to be financially profitable. So far, so good on that front. It's too early to tell on numbers for console, but I'm not expecting blockbuster numbers here since this is a very dark, mature, and niche title that's being marketed as a horror action RPG. But it is so far the biggest new multi-plat title this month, and it's maybe one of the biggest releases of the summer. So it has that going for it too. Summer is usually a slow release for big titles, as many of the super blockbusters will wait for the fall rush. So Vampyr releasing now will probably help it breathe and give it some legs in this market. The marketing hasn't been huge, but the title generated a lot of buzz at E3 a few years ago, and the community anecdotally in my opinion, seem to be anticipating its release. Twitch viewership has been healthy so far, averaging a peak of about 77,000 viewers over the past few days. Again, these are rough estimates, and it's only been a few days, but it's doing fine on that platform too so far. In general, it's being reviewed well and is selling well, but it's too early to make any final pronouncements. Dontnod really needs the Life is Strange crowd to embrace this title. It won't go viral and it won't go mainstream like that one will, but their sales expectations are very modest, and I don't think it's going to have any trouble exceeding 500,000 units. Definitely not over its lifetime. That's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I really liked Vampyr, and I'm hoping it does well, so maybe we can get another game in this universe. I think in general with Vampyr mythology, you can just about set a game at any time period in history, a la Assassin's Creed, and the game can be interesting and unique because of that setting. I recommend this title, and I think there's a lot to love here, but it has a few annoying negatives that you're going to see right off the bat. The opening is clumsy, it is horrible, but if you stick with it a little bit, because it takes a while to get good, but if you stick with it, I think you're going to find a rewarding game that has a really neat narrative. If you enjoyed this video and you like the content I make, maybe consider subscribing, and if you have a Twitter, you can follow me at Midnight Vigil. Thanks, guys. I will see you next time.